So you've just picked yourself up a camera or you've had one for a while and you want to know where to get started. Taking photos and recording video can be as easy as pointing and shooting, but unless you have a rough idea of what you're doing, they're just going to look like photos and videos from your phone. So in this video, I'm going to run you through the basic settings of what you should change on your camera in order to give you the best chance of taking the best images. So let's dive into these camera settings, and just keep in mind that some of these words might be different on your camera. Every camera manufacturer uses different words to describe their settings, but regardless of what camera you have, you'll be able to follow along. Change your focus mode. This is something I see beginners get messed up on all the time, and it's probably one of the most important things to take into consideration when you're out shooting. See, you want to change your focus mode when your subject or scene is either still or moving. AF one shot is when your camera and lens will ping focus once when you half press down your shutter button, and until you do that again, it will not change the focus. This is best for landscapes, still scenes, or still subjects. AF servo or AF continuous, like it is on every other camera brand except for Canon, is when your camera and lens will consistently hunt for focus until you release the shutter button. When you half press down your shutter button or just start to take photos, your camera and lens will constantly ping focus until you release it, keeping any moving subjects in focus. And this is best used in situations where either you are moving or your subject is moving to and from the camera or around the scene in general. But do keep in mind that if you have an older camera or lens, you might have a bit of a harder time using AF servo or continuous. So just test this at home before you go out to use it on a shoot. Shoot in RAW. This one bit me in the ass like crazy. If you plan on taking photography seriously at all, you want to be shooting in RAW and editing every single selected image you take. This way you'll get the best results from your camera, and you'll also start leveling up your photo editing skill and experience and start to develop a style alongside your photography and level them up at the same time. A RAW image is when you get a full sensor readout of what your camera's sensor captured during exposure, compared to a JPEG where you get a compressed, pre-processed version of that RAW image. And while you can still edit JPEG images, the control, information, and flexibility that a RAW image gives you is like no other, and it's an honest no-brainer if you plan on editing your images. Also, in RAW images, you get complete control of the white balance when you're editing, versus when you're editing a JPEG and the white balance is baked onto that photo and is very hard to change. And talking about white balance, make sure you're shooting in auto white balance. This one again is aimed at photographers and not video shooters, but if there is one less thing you have to think about before you press that shutter button, before you take that image, and it can be white balance, by all means use auto white balance. I know some people are very kind of strict on this and will only shoot, I guess will select their white balance and then shoot, and that's what you should do for video, but for photos, especially if you're shooting RAW because you have all the flexibility and control in post, it's a no-brainer to use auto white balance. See, the white balance of any scene can change very, very quickly depending on what light source is going on, depending if cloud comes over the sun, whatever the case, you want to make sure you're always getting a fairly accurate representation of what it actually looked like, and to use auto white balance is a no-brainer. In saying this though, try and steer away from auto white balance if you're shooting video, purely for the fact that you don't want your white balance to change in the middle of a shot. For example, if cloud does come over the sun while you're shooting a clip, you don't want your camera to automatically change the white balance while you're shooting. It'll completely ruin your clip, and it will make it very hard in post to correct. Near impossible in all honesty. But what is white balance? Well, white balance is the balance of colors that will accurately represent real life. Have you ever been in a room with like really cold, blue, harsh lights versus a room with nice, warm, tinted, yellowy, orangey kind of lights? Well, that's got to do with white balance, and that's all measured using a scale called Kelvin. If you dive deep enough into your camera, you can find and manually adjust some Kelvin settings, and you will realize that the lower the Kelvin setting is, the bluer the image will get, and the higher the Kelvin setting is, the warmer the image will get. Your camera, just like our eyes, needs to adjust for all these different lighting settings, and believe me, auto white balance is an absolute godsend. Next up, you want to start getting really familiar with the 3 key exposure settings, and that's shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. This isn't a video of me breaking down these settings, but you do need to get familiar with them. All these 3 settings dictate how bright or how dark your image is, while also independently affecting different aspects of your shot. Let me give you a quick run through. A fast shutter speed will freeze motion but give you a darker image, while a slow shutter speed will give you motion and a brighter image. A high aperture will keep more in focus and give you a darker image, while a low aperture will give you a more blurry background, keep less in focus, and give you a brighter image. A low ISO will give you a clean looking image with no digital noise and will give you a darker shot, while a higher ISO will give you a more noisy, grainier image but will keep your shot bright. The idea is to kind of use these three settings in sync with each other and get to a point where they just complement each other. And if you increase the shutter speed, you have to decrease your aperture and increase your ISO to keep a nice, clean, consistent exposure for your shot. This triangle that I definitely didn't make, and shout out to whoever did, explains things very, very well. And last but not least, you need to start taking your cameras to more places. This isn't a technical aspect of photography or about gear or anything else you can control behind the camera, but it's more about you shooting more, because that is the best and quickest way you will learn and get better at photography. You also want to start to set aside time and different locations to specifically go and shoot where that is all you do. The first 10,000 photos you take are going to be your absolute worst. And only after you reach that 10,000 photo mark goal, you will then start to progress as a photographer. And when I say 10,000 photos, I don't mean and I don't include you putting your camera on high burst mode and just spraying and praying all over the place. I mean 10,000 meaningful, thought out, or good images that you class as different from all the other ones. You can't just have 100 of one person doing one thing. Like, you'll just take one individual shot from that. So 10,000 photos like that is exactly what I mean. Now, this isn't just something I'm pulling out of the air, by the way. This is like a well-known fact in the photography community, and it's something you should really keep in mind. Now, 10,000 photos is sounding like a lot, especially as a beginner. It can kind of seem just a little bit overwhelming. But in all honesty, with the amount of styles and types of photography you've got to choose from, you can really broaden your horizons here and start taking photos of absolutely everything and anything, and you'll really see those 10,000 photos tick over pretty damn quickly. I believe you've got to take about 27 and a half, let's round up to 28 photos a day for 1 year to get 10,000 photos in a year. So now you've got the right tools, you've got them set up correctly, and you've got a fairly good mindset. It's now time for you to go out, find inspiration, and begin shooting. If you stay consistent with it, set goals and build targets, believe me, you'll become a better photographer in no time. Photography is something that takes a lot of time to get right, and there is no way in hell you can get good at photography just like that. But anyway, guys, that wraps up today's video. I hope you have enjoyed, and also welcome to the new studio. This is something that I've created in the past week or so, hence why I've had a solid little break from YouTube. I've currently moved into a brand new place here in Bali, and yeah, that kind of took just a little bit more time and effort than I was expecting. But nonetheless, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you have enjoyed, let me know down below. If you've learned something today, also let me know down below. If you're new around here, subscribe, and as always, I will catch you in the next one. Peace.